Welcome to Real Talk Come Follow Me. We're so glad that you have joined us. This week we're going to jump into 4 more books of scripture. We're almost to Moses 7. That's what I'm trying to get ready for, right?
Yeah, I love Moses 7.
Yeah, Genesis 3 through 4 and Moses 4 through 5. And right away, Genesis 3, we could go in a lot of directions here, but verse 20, Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And I've shared pretty publicly my journey with infertility. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to kind of understand the meaning of what Eve as the mother of all living really meant, right?
Yeah.
And for those that are dealing with infertility, it can be a really tender thing when everyone's like, hey, can you replenish the earth and have children and multiply? And you're thinking, I'm trying. I've been to we've done all the tests and it's just not happening. Or you haven't had the opportunity to be married and have that experience as well. And so I love, do you remember Sister Maria? I miss her. Her way of teaching was just made me happy all the time. Yeah. She said this, mothers literally make room in their bodies to nurture an unborn baby and hopefully a place in their hearts as they raise them. But nurturing is not limited to bearing children. Eve was called a mother before she had children.
That's kind of cool.
Right?
Yeah.
So Adam is saying Eve is the mother of all living, and she hasn't had the opportunity to give birth. And Sister Marriott went on to say, I believe that to mother means to give life. Think of the many ways you give life. It could mean giving emotional life to the hopeless or spiritual life to the doubter. With the help of the Holy Ghost, we can create an emotionally healing place for the discriminated against, the rejected, and the stranger. I love that concept.
I love it. This reminds me just kind of our last episode last week where we talked about sort of the complementary nature of men and women and expanding that into our communities, right? We're not just talking about marriage. Mm-hmm. We're not just talking about, we're talking about just something inherent about men and women that we bring to the table that makes things better. And this really speaks to that sort of some inherent beautiful trait that women possess.
Right.
That they can bring to the table regardless of marital status, for instance. And
I'm going to do a shout out to Betsy, who is now an amazing stepmother, but for most of her adult life through her 40s, she was not married and had no children, and she was part of our family by choice. And she mothered and created a safe place for my children. I feel like she helped raise my kids. Yeah. And I was so grateful when I was going through chemotherapy and there was a time we weren't sure I was going to make it. I knew that there would be this mother figure in their lives that could be there for those hard times. And so I just think those women, specifically this week, to seek them out. The mothers that are women that maybe haven't given birth and thank them for their contribution. Mother Teresa. I mean, we call her mother, right? Exactly. I mean, just because of the role she played in sort of a collective healing. And, Okay, Genesis 4. John's middle name is Enoch.
My middle name is Enoch.
And so in verse 17, it's talking about Cain knew his wife and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. But this is not the Enoch you are looking for.
This is not the Enoch you're looking for.
This is not, if you're listening on podcast, you are not seeing John and I
Shout out Star Wars fans. This is not the Enoch you're looking for.
This is not. We will talk about that Enoch. But
this isn't the one.
Where did your middle name come from?
My middle name comes from my grandpa Fossum was John Fossum. Okay. But his father-in-law's name was John Enoch Johnson. Oh. And so I'm a carryover to keep the John Enoch. So people in my extended family usually refer to me as John Enoch because we have 1 million Johns in the Fossum family. Okay, so John Enoch. John Enoch that's me. Okay. Right?
But you're not the Enoch of Genesis 4.
If I'm going to be likened to any Enoch in the scriptures, it's this one, the no-name nobody who built some random city that we just move on and don't
talk about. And we think because the verse says it's Enoch and he builds a city that we're like, we know what Enoch that is. Yeah.
It's like, hey, there's a guy named Enoch, he built a city. Oh, that guy? No, it's not that one. There's a small little...
Same in the Book of Mormon. That's which Ammon are you talking about? Which Nephi are you talking about?
Little huts, and they were really evil.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I want to move into, so Moses 4 talks a lot about sort of the references to war in heaven and premortality. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of rethink a couple things. And I'd like to just invite our listeners and viewers to think about. So there, years ago, you've published a million things. I've published one. And it was an article from like 10 years ago written about, and I wrote it about God's plan versus Satan's proposal, trying to just offer a new lens to what might have happened in premortality. Because it's common for us to say that Satan in premortality had this plan. And his plan was, I'm going to force everyone to choose the right so that everyone will be saved. It still doesn't feel right to me because it doesn't seem very satanic. You know what I mean?
If his why was to have us choose right, that feels contradictory.
It seems like, what's he doing down here then?
Yeah.
Because in the Bible dictionary, for instance, it says that the same war and the same sort of issues that we were fighting over there are being fought over. It just changed battlegrounds, right? And I look around, I don't see Satan trying to force anybody to choose the right so we can all be saved.
Go to the temple, pay your tithing, fast more.
I don't see that.
Serve a longer mission.
And so we'll put a link to the article in the show notes.
The John Fossum article.
The John Fossum publication. And but I would love to see what our viewers and listeners think of it. But I'm not alone in this. I found some past prophets and apostles who had similar thoughts about maybe if we look around and we see what Satan's doing now, we see your truth. You do what you want. You should be able to do what you want, and that should be fine. And you should be able to do what you want, and that's fine. And you should be able to do what you want, and that's fine.
Like no boundaries.
Right. And we should all just be good. And so there's a article, there's sort of an argument to be made that Satan's plan was to do what you want. Not everyone has to choose the right so I'll be saved. It was just do what you want, and we should all just be saved. And that little paradigm shift sort of changes things just a little bit. Anyway.
Which is a lot of what Moses 4 helps
Moses,
us.
Right? We'll talk more about that, but I think you have something you want to say about that.
Well, I just think that Satan is an all or nothing thinker. And so I think the all or nothing for him is like, let's all have zero expectations, zero boundaries, control the variables and the vulnerability. And God is definitely more expansive, and he's okay with the nuance. He's okay with the mess. We're going to talk a little bit more about that this is not a test that we're experiencing. But anytime I get into all or nothing thinking, because I can so go there. Like I can get absolute about everything, right? And there's no temperance. I love the word temperance, right? Because it allows for the variables and the nuance. And that's not to say that God's like, oh, just do whatever you want. He's saying to us, don't get so tunnel vision. And I think what you just invited us to consider is that Satan is like very tunnel vision about not being required to do anything.
Yeah, which is fascinating. Right?
I know.
And I can honestly see how that proposal would be tempting.
Totally.
More tempting than, hey, I got a plan. I'm going to force you to do everything right, and I'm going to save you, you know? I'd be like, no, I don't like that. How about you should be able to just be you and do you, and there should be... Anyway, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to know what people think. Related to that, I don't know, maybe another potential paradigm shift.
Okay.
You just mentioned it. Maybe flesh it out a little bit about life. We're, again, it's common for us to say life is a test. That's fine, I think, as a metaphor, as long as we know what we mean and what we don't mean. What are we saying, what are we not saying? So let's just think it through logically.
I don't really love the metaphor, so I'm glad you're going to unpack it.
Yeah, let's unpack it a little bit.
Okay.
And just consider the traditional sense of a test. It would be the equivalent of this. You study for months.
Or some people cram the night before.
Whatever. You get ready for this test. You're in college. It's a math test. I hate math, okay?
That's why you majored in English.
That's why I majored in English. And you go to the testing center, prepped. You've been prepping, man. You're ready. And you get there and you're like, I'm ready to take the test. And they go, okay, let's see how ready you really are. And they take one of those like Men in Black, like forget everything pens, and they blast you, right? And they wipe clean all your memory of everything. I felt
every time I took a test.
You're a total idiot at this point, and they say, now go take the test and see how much you know. We're going to really see how much you know. Well, of course you know nothing because you're just wiped clean. So that's not a fair assessment. That's silly.
But it is the metaphor we
But that's the metaphor we use, okay? So instead of a test, I would just like us to think about this one line. Life is not a test, it's a classroom. And if we shift the focus from test to classroom, There's less all or nothing thinking, right? It's more of a process of learning, primarily through, the temple teaches very clearly that this learning process is primarily intended to occur through our learning from our own experiences to distinguish between right and wrong.
Which is code for messing up.
Messing up. That is the plan, right? If there was ever a test, I would say, it was in premortality.
Okay.
Let me tell you why I think that.
Okay.
If we go to Revelation chapter 12 in the New Testament, verses 6 through 11, it talks about how we overcame Satan in premortality. It says, we have overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. In premortality, there was no veil. We saw clearly. And this is a comforting principle to me, and I'd love for us to just think about how this may change the way we view the world. If everyone I see around me, if I remember this right here, I tell myself this as regularly as I can when I'm in public. Everyone around me has already shown that when they see clearly, they choose Jesus. To one degree or another, they do. It actually says in what was it? It was in, I got it in my notes, but Abraham 3:26. It says if they keep their first estate, if they choose Jesus, the reward is mortality, this mortal existence. This isn't a test, this is a classroom reward experience of growth. And the primary tools?
Is messing up.
Messing up.
And I think that's so crucial because as you were talking about it, that's a comfort, right? That's a comfort that when we have loved ones that maybe choose to walk away, I like to really talk about how Satan is so afraid of everything we have that he will never have. So I love the idea that everything in this life, our bodies, our family, and our faith were a reward. Right? And then I think it's in Moses 5 where Eve is talking about their transgression, right?
Right.
And her understanding or wisdom, which is a female word, right, is experience and knowledge, right? It's the together of that. So God could have easily put us through like a fast course in the preexistence of just constant knowledge. But he knew it was the experience together that would create the wisdom. It was the both together that we had to experience it. And so much as parents, we want to tell our kids, like, seriously, you don't need to take that route. Like, let's just have a really good family home evening lesson or a really good come follow me discussion this week. And then maybe you won't choose into that experience. And yet, really, God's not panicked about that.
He's not panicking. Boy, that's an important thing you just said there. God is not panicking. Panic, anxiety, these are not fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
If I'm ever looking around at anyone's situation and I'm full of panic and fear and anxiety, something's not quite balanced in my understanding and perspective. Because if I was seeing that situation as God sees it, I wouldn't panic.
Well, to go back.
Doesn't mean I wouldn't have feelings about it.
Right.
And we'll talk about that in Moses 7.
Right. Right.
Right? But I wouldn't panic.
I think that's the all or nothing. That's exactly when I know I'm in ownership versus stewardship is because I'm trying to control the outcome. And I've already decided that this act of the play is somehow the end of the story. And it's not. I mean, I think you shared with me too, you always have students ask you about this, right? Like they're panicked because one of their siblings or someone they love.
All the time.
What do you say?
Maybe the most common question, honestly. So I have something in my classroom called the Gospel Box, where they can submit anonymous questions, and every one day a week, we open that thing and we start pulling out questions and we just talk about it. And I tell them I won't back down from any question you ask, and they ask some doozies. But
that was training for real talk when the camera rolls, right? Sweating.
Yes, but a very common question is that right there. Oh, what if my brother or my sister or my mom or my dad, sort of never get it together in this life? Is it just over? Because they're operating under this assumption that life is a pass-fail test instead of a classroom for learning that continues, and this is what I emphasize in this question when I answer it, that continues into the spirit world. Jesus comes again, and it continues again for, 1,000 more years. You know what I mean? Like this, God is committed to our learning process. That's why he gave his son, so that we can learn within the safety of the atoning grace of Jesus Christ. I'm thinking of Alma 34:16. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but it says something about safety, the safety the atonement gives us in this mortal experience.
You were just teaching me in real time, like I was having this awareness of what you shared, which is when people have the opportunity to see Jesus. How did you say that?
Yeah. Everyone has already shown that when they see clearly, they choose Jesus to one degree or another. They do. They're here.
The millennium, we know that existence will feel very different because Satan will be bound.
Jesus will be here.
So this war that started in heaven, that this week we get to talk about, like full send on the war in heaven, right? That there's going to be 1,000 years where he is bound and Jesus is ruling.
Yes. I mean, I can't even imagine.
How expansive. That's like
but that is
50
hopeful.
Tutors, like all the extra help that you need to work things out. I think it's such a hopeful message that like, what a great week to sit down and say, it's a classroom and it's a one-room schoolhouse, right? So we're working with people that are like at, the old classrooms, like the kindergartners were there with the 8th graders, right?
We're all in it together.
Yeah, we're all getting it.
To the point of sin and suffering being our primary teachers in this classroom, scripturally, if we're looking for sort of some scriptural precedent for this, Moses 4:22 through 25. God emphasizes this with Adam and Eve. He starts with Eve and he says, because of the fall, this is now the nature of your mortal classroom reward experience. I know it doesn't feel like, Ganel-Lyn, when you were going through chemotherapy, did that feel like a reward?
Not at all, but it was the greatest teacher ever.
I mean, retrospect is wonderful, right, in those situations. But man, when we're going through it, horrible.
Right.
God says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow. In sorrow, cursed will be the earth for your sake. I'm doing it for your good, right?
Yeah. I love you so much.
It's so hard to hear. Adam, in sorrow, thorns and thistles, buddy. Get ready for thorns and thistles, and by the sweat of thy face, those are the designated divine instruments for teaching in our mortal existence. But I love this little verse 27, Moses 4:27. He doesn't leave us comfortless. He sends us out into this world that's hard, but he covers us.
Yep.
He covers us in garments, right? The garments representing Jesus Christ, covenants, light, truth. He doesn't leave us alone. He covers us in the safety of Jesus Christ. I just love it.
And that's exactly as you continue, right? That Jesus is in the Old Testament, right? Because here in verse 11, and the joy of our redemption and the eternal life which God giveth unto all the obedient. Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy. 2 Nephi 2:25, right? Yeah. So the joy of arthritis, addiction, anxiety. I like a good alliteration.
The joy.
The joy of that, right? The joy is that we rejoiced because when the plan was thorns, sweat, sorrows, it was that Christ was the joy of our redemption. It was the joy that would come because of these experiences that would bring us back to Christ.
And I don't want to be like an Eeyore or anything about our mortal existence, but I do want to recognize and be real. Like, it is hard. And but I do think that most of our joy, most of our growth, most of our enlightenment either from our experiences here will come retrospectively. After this life, when we look back and there's a great sort of debriefing, kind of like watching game film, right?
Where we can always see, like, oh.
I mean, I don't really want to watch my game film. I mean, I've already lived it. But I mean, I think, imagine debriefing your life looking back with Jesus, just debriefing it. And just saying, instead of, oh, what did I do? What did you learn through that?
Or will we see the grace where he he made all the difference.
The covering. Yeah.
Well, I think it's all stewardship. That's what I always try to squeeze into
right.
every episode.
You're right, man.
Right?
You're right.
It's all stewardship. And so instead of labeling it as this is the bad stuff and this is the good stuff, if we can see it as stewardship, it's ultimately for us to become, right? And so God trusted you and then trusted Rachel, your daughter, with a different stewardship in her body for her classroom experience, right? Do you want to say anything about sweet Rachel before? Sorry.
No, but I will say I will say that Rachel, some people are wont to say about our special needs kids that they didn't need a mortal experience. They just get a free ride or whatever, right? And they're good with that. You know, they're just like, they were amazing in premortality, which may be the case. But I'm just telling you, as a father for my daughter, she is having a mortal experience like the rest of us. She's learning the difference between right and wrong, light and dark, joy and sorrow, pain and comfort, all those things. She's learning just in a different way, but she is having very much a mortal experience side by side with the rest of us. in this life.
And her stewardship is helping you in your stewardship,
Yes.
right? Because you get the opportunity to parent.
And you say stewardship, and so maybe this is an opportunity to kind of wrap things up by you just help me see in real time that a potential stewardship might be wayward children. Now, I don't want to overstate this, but I do want to make this point. It is interesting to me that the first mother, Eve, with her first son, she prays. Look at this, Moses 5:16. Eve was so happy. She prayed he would be obedient, and he wasn't. And that was before we had this world with all this evil garbage just pouring over us.
On our phones.
And yet Cain still chose to rebel. Who knows why our children rebel sometimes? You know what I mean? I heard something recently that gave at least three, they're like, don't oversimplify your child. And they gave at least three sources for why your child may be the way they are.
Teach me.
Premortal habits. I mean, some prophets and apostles say we lived in premortality for eons.
Right.
We brought that character with us.
Oh, yeah.
Mortal genetics.
Right.
We are born genetically predisposed to certain things.
Right.
And then the influences of our upbringing and communal worldview.
Because imperfect parents are raising kids that then become imperfect parents.
Yes. So I'll just say this. Be careful how much blame you take for your children's failures. And on the flip side, be careful how much praise you take for their successes.
It's ownership versus stewardship.
Yeah, I just try to, as I take that approach as a father, I don't know, I don't panic as much. But
because it's so much more
complex. It's a sacred stewardship that some people are just, it just happens despite our best efforts.
Well, I love what you reference on Eve because her son killed her son. Like, how do you come back from that?
Right.
I have to trust that her endowment, her covenants are what sustained her as her heart broke. Because what she prayed for and all that she and Adam did in family home evening or whatever that looked like, it turned out so differently than what she hoped for, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to give our invitation?
Ready for an invitation?
Okay.
I think our invitation for this week, I think I would put it this way, I would encourage us all to look for an opportunity to reframe. Consider what the implications might be in your own life. If life is not a test, it's a classroom. Consider what the implications may be if sin and suffering and distress are the primary tools and teachers of this plan. I think it would help us view things a little bit differently and with a little bit more hope and optimism. We would be more patient with ourselves and we'd be more patient with others. And so that's the invitation we leave with you. We're glad you joined us today and we hope to see you next week for Real Talk. Do you like Real Talk? Come follow me.
Then like and subscribe.